Hello and welcome to the Skylanders Spyro's Adventure developer commentary. It gives me great pleasure to introduce you to the game designer, Blake Maloof. Guess I should open with, what were your roles on Skylanders Spyro's Adventure?
Skylanders Spyro's Adventure was my first actual industry game. So I started out sort of just like learning the engine that we were working in, which was sort of an in-house engine that, it's probably my favorite engine that I've worked in. It was a really like versatile thing. Like you could kind of script out any kind of interactions. I started out doing kind of enemy setups, which is where we'd go into a level and we would take the enemies that we had in the level and kind of be like, okay, so in this point there'll be 3 enemies that come out of this side, and then 2 enemies that are shooting you from over here, kind of setting up that whole interaction, and sort of where enemies come out and how they come out. That was a big part of the work is figuring out how the enemies enter the space. So we came up with some interesting stuff for that, which that eventually grew in Trap Team. I had this whole system for making like ships that come out and like guys jump off the ships, and that got really complicated.
And was it setting up enemies throughout every level or just a set?
Yeah, I mean we sort of divided up levels. We sort of have like an enemy design team that everyone sort of gets their own level. And they do setups for each of those levels. Me being a new designer, I was sort of given like an area of a level, which the first one that I worked on was I'm trying to remember the actual name of it. I think it was Creepy Catacombs. We called it Spider Dungeon at the time. So I had like this big, like sort of towards the end of the level, there was this big fight where you just fight a bunch of spiders in a room. And that was my first like actual enemy placement, encounter assignment. Which that was a lot of fun. I sort of, I wrote a script for that sort of was like a wave manager. So it would manage like, oh, there are going to be 5 spiders that come out in this first stage, and then once you defeat 4 of them, then 2 more of these other ones come out. Sort of like managing that kind of complexity, and that's something that I eventually grew into an arena system for the later games.
That's really cool. Did you decide what type of enemies it would be, or was it just where they were going to come from?
Yeah, by the time that I was working on it, the enemies were pretty much made, and so I was just coming in to, make cool setups that involved the different ones, how they could interact. Like there was one that would like grab you and pull you, and another ones that would run up and explode at you. So sort of like, it's like, oh, if I have both of those, I can grab you and then get you, get the little guys to explode on you. Sort of seeing how they interacted was fun.
That's cool. So at what point did you join the game?
So I joined about 3 months from, I guess from alpha. So there had already been like 2 or 3 years of development, I think, at that point. And so we were really like just kind of trying to wrap up the game at that point. So I came in and I was sort of like doing sort of polish stuff. Just sort of adding little bits to the hub. There was, we sort of had the hub area and we wanted to populate it with just sort of like interesting things that you could do. There was one of the things that I started working on was this like totem, the elemental totem that would pop up, and you would have to hit each of the blocks with a different element.
Yes.
And so that was one of the first like things that I worked on, was just getting that to work, and then spitting out a prize at the top.
That's really cool.
Yeah, that was a neat experiment.
So did you find it a challenge to balance the difficulty throughout the game?
Yeah, that was definitely one of the things in working in Skylanders, is like, how difficult did we want to make it? How often did we want you to die? Sort of as the enemy team, we always wanted to, like, we sort of felt like our job was to kill the player. But then you sort of have to, pull back from that a little bit. Like, we want it to be fair, but also challenging, and sort of figuring out where we put that challenge, and trying to, ramp it up over the course of the game. Was a lot of stuff that we focused on.
Interesting. And did you find it easier or harder to develop this kind of stuff for later games because of the different abilities that newer Skylanders would have?
Oh yeah, I mean it just got exponentially more complicated as we're trying to develop, and we always would start with the idea of like, oh, this is an enemy that, if you're this type of Pokemon, like, or sorry, Skylander.
Have you been playing Sword and Shield by any chance?
Yep.
Massive respect.
Absolutely. Yeah, I got Pokemon on the brain. So if you bring in like a ranged Skylander, like, you would have an easier time defeating this enemy. Like, we kind of wanted to have those sort of fundamental questions, of like which like, you would encounter an enemy and then be like, all right, which Skylander would be the best one to defeat this enemy? And so we always tried to push that, but then sort of over time, a lot of that became like, oh, we don't want to like force you to switch characters. Like, if you're playing a character that you really like, we want you to keep playing that character. So a lot of that sort of differentiation kind of got washed out. And it just sort of like, there were some, and especially in the original game, there were still some levels that one particular character or type of character would be really useful with. Like, I think in the crystal mine level, there were some things that, like, prism break could like break the crystals really easily. Like, there were still some little things that remained that one character was particularly good at. And I always liked those moments.
That's fascinating. You mentioned earlier that you joined just a bit before Alpha, after it had been in development for 2 or so years. So how late does an Alpha or Beta even typically come in a game? I would have thought Alpha was much earlier than a Beta.
Yeah, it is sort of like when you're doing something so sort of experimental, like, there's a lot of sort of early prototyping, and sort of figuring out what you want this game to be. Like, there was the whole toy aspect that was sort of a big unknown for a long time, like how that was going to work with the game. Usually, like, Alpha and Beta are sort of, once you're in like full production, like, you sort of prototype for a while, and then once you're like, all right, this is good, this is what we want to do, or the publisher says, hey, you got to make this game now. So we sort of try and get everything that we imagine the final game will have in the game, and then we sort of polish that and make it, we do some balancing, we do some tuning, to get it to Beta, and then Beta is basically just, after that, it's bug fixing.
Fair enough.
Alpha is like, this is all the pieces that we want in this game are there and relatively working.
I see.
And then from there, you make it all look good and stuff. So yeah, by the time I got there, there was a lot of game already there, because they've been working on it for a long time. So it was really just sort of tying everything together, getting all of the like final little pieces that we wanted to get up to alpha.
Cool. So this is across all games. Do you have a favorite Skylander?
Ooh, man. I mean, I was always a fan of Chop Chop, and like I've collected a couple like special Chop Chops. Like there was a green transparent one that I have. I also got a Japanese Chop Chop.
Oh, cool.
Which was really cool when the Japanese version came out. We got a couple Japanese ones.
Are there any major differences between the two, or?
I don't think so. I mean, yeah, I haven't actually played the Japanese version, but yeah, I think we were able to pretty much just translate it and port it. That was a really interesting thing because when Skylanders started out, like basically, you know, people who knew the Japanese game market were like, you can't just put out a game without like an anime associated with it, or whatever. So we were like, okay, well, you know, we'll release in, you know, America and Europe, and then after it came out, like they would do like focus tests with Japanese people, and they, you know, they would see the toys and be like, oh my god, I need that, like I want that, and so they were like, oh, let's just try it. Let's just try releasing in Japan, and it, yeah, I think it did pretty well over there.
That's awesome. So, what was your favorite part of development?
I definitely always like just sort of experimenting. Prototyping is usually my favorite part. That's when you get to just sort of like take some like blocks, basically, you know, before you have any art for something, you just sort of make something that looks vaguely like what you want it to be, and have it like behave sort of what you expect it to do. And yeah, just sort of doing a lot of iteration of like make an enemy sort of as just sort of like a series of blocks, basically, or reusing other enemies. One of the things we did a lot was just take a Skylander model and just change its color to make it an enemy.
Is that how like the alternate colored Skylanders during the Chaos fights came about?
I guess so. Yeah, I mean, I think that was just sort of, that came from the idea that Chaos is also a Portal Master, so he would also have Skylanders that he could control. And it was sort of a cool thing to like reuse some of their powers and change them up to be sort of more boss fight ready. I mean, I guess they never really did boss fights proper in Skylanders. I was sort of like the alternate sort of end things like the arenas and sort of like mini boss type things.
Did you do a lot of work on the arena in Giants?
Yeah. So Giants was the first like official arena that we did, and that was my baby. Like and I just, you know, made this sort of circular space, and I was like, all right, there's going to be a guy yelling at you at the top. I just put the big like drow Goliath guy up there, and put a funny hat on him. And so then I just sort of reusing the like wave systems that I had been working on, and sort of beefed them up and made some interesting setups. And it was kind of like, that was just a thing that I was like, this would be really cool. And I just sort of prototyped a thing and showed it to people and was like, hey, isn't this cool? And they were like, yeah, let's put that in the level. Oh,
I really loved that kind of thing in the series, so thank you.
Yeah, I'm glad you liked it.
Bit of a like open question here, but and this can be across like any of the games, I guess. But what would you say is the weirdest thing that happened during development? Weird or maybe funny, like just a random story.
Oh well, definitely one of my favorite things in the first game in Spyro's Adventure. There was we put a little Mabu kid in the hub, the first opening area. And so he would just run around. Our design director at the time was just like, I just like his run animation, so you should put him in and just have him running around. But I wanted you to be able to interact with him, so I was like, oh, it'd be really cool if he like said different things based on what your character was playing, what Skylander you had. And so I sort of wrote up a bunch of like stub lines. A lot of what we would do is I would just write like temp lines just to put them in, and then we would have a writer like rewrite a lot of the stuff and sort of add jokes and stuff like that. But my favorite one was for Prism Break. It was a big rock monster with like crystal stuff growing out of him. I just wrote the line, "Hey, do you poop diamonds?" And I was like, there's no way they're going to leave that in the final game. But then they did. And so that was one of my favorite things, that I just like snuck a poop joke in, and they liked it. So it made it to the final game.
That's awesome.
So, do you poop diamonds?
Did anything else make it into the games like that?
I'm trying to see. There was also another one that I did. There was like a balloon ride that you could do in the first game. Like you just go up to Flynn and be like, "Hey, you want to do a little lap around the hub?" And so so that I wrote a lot of lines for that, and a lot of them got changed. But yeah, I don't remember any specific lines from that.
And what have you worked on since working on Skylanders?
Yeah, we rolled onto Spyro, the Spyro remaster, which was really cool. I mean, when I first got the job, when I first learned that we were making a game with Spyro in it, I was really excited because Spyro was a big, one of my favorite games as a kid, and so I was like, okay, yeah, we're sort of working on something that's Spyro related. But then once we got the remaster, it was finally we could make a full game about Spyro, and that was really exciting to me.
Did you have similar roles?
Yeah, in that one, it was so that game has just an absurd amount of enemies that are all pretty unique. So yeah, we just sort of divided up a lot of the enemies between the enemy designers, and yeah, it was really just sort of like playing them, trying to match their behavior as closely as possible, which is sort of a different challenge than coming up with their attacks and stuff. So it was different, but it was a fun challenge. Try and make sure that they felt the same. One of the biggest ones was in the early, when we were sort of trying to get the enemy systems working, trying to see how close we could get them to the actual enemies in the original games, was the sleeping dog from Toasty. Like that was always like, everyone who played it was like, oh my god, those are really hard enemies. Like they attack like pretty much instantaneously. And so that we did a lot of sort of iteration on that to make it still tough, but sort of up to modern standards of like they actually sort of have a little bit of a tell before they attack, but making sure that didn't make it too much easier. So we sort of did a lot of back and forth with tuning that to make sure it felt about the same.
Well, yeah, thank you very much for your work on both Skylanders and Spyro, because I as you probably know, love both of them. So
yeah, I've gotten that impression.
So yeah, no, I and many others really appreciate what you all did, and for all your combined efforts. I guess
it was a lot of work.
Final question is what advice do you have for aspiring designers?
Well, I mean, my favorite piece of advice for people that want to get into making games is just start making games. Like the software is so like readily available now. Like you can just download Unity or Unreal, and there's tutorials online. Or you can just start making like board games or card games. Like it's my favorite aspect of game design is just iterative, like rapid iteration, where you sort of start out with as simple of a concept as possible, and then you play that and you see how that feels and what you think could be improved, and then you do it again and you make a new version, and then you just keep doing that and playing it and showing it to other people, and just sort of refine it, and then you'll have a cool game. Like board games are really easy to make. I've done a few just sort of board game projects of just like I have an idea that I want to test out, and so I just make like a simple board, some cards, and get some friends around and be like, hey, how does this feel to play?
That is fantastic. Thank you once again for agreeing to be a part of this. I'm sure a lot of people will love to learn what you've done and contributed, and yeah, I'm sure a lot of people will really. Yeah, I know I love hearing about it. It's really fascinating to me.
Yeah, no, I enjoy talking about it because there's just so many things that are just sort of natural to me at this point that I tell other people, and they're like, "Oh my god, that's so cool!" And I was like, "Oh yeah, it is really cool."
Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, leave a like, subscribe, share the video around. I also have a Twitch, a Twitter, and a Patreon if you would like to support me and the channel. As you can probably tell, this is a massive passion project of mine that I've been working on for quite some time, and I'm really glad that I'm able to get it out to you, and I'm really grateful for you watching the video. If you want to see more from the series or other stuff that I do on this channel, click that notification bell to be notified when I upload next. But thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.